Coming up, as the redistricting process unfolds nationwide, how has this impacted the native vote? ICT's Karina Dominguez breaks it down. Plus, we learn about a new graphic novel made by a team of Indigenous creatives. I am Aaliyah Chavez. Join us for those interviews plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is a proud supporter of Indian Country Today. Students at Cronkite News and Gaylord College at the University of Oklahoma cover Indigenous communities together. This important work is distributed by more than 100 news organizations. This collaboration provides a much-needed boost to coverage of Native American communities nationwide. Learn more at cronkitenews.azpbs.org.
This is the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez.
Thank you for joining the ICT Newscast. In Montana, there is a push to protect Native voting rights. Last week, the Native American Rights Fund and the ACLU of Montana filed for an injunction in a voter suppression lawsuit. The injunction will prevent two bills from going into law until the case is decided. One of the bills would stop voters from being able to register on the same day as voting, something that many Native voters have relied upon to cast votes in Montana since 2005. The other bill attempts to block organized ballot collection on reservations. NARF staff attorney Samantha Kelty says the injunction will protect voting rights for 2022.
We all are familiar with the long lines in Texas and in Georgia. But this is what voter suppression looks like in Indian country. It's an intentional and clear-cut exploitation of current vulnerabilities that the community already faces.
Kelty says she is hopeful the federal Freedom to Vote Act will pass into law, but says NARF will continue to fight state to state for the Native vote. In South Dakota, money has not been budgeted to hire a specialist to work at addressing the missing and murdered Indigenous peoples crisis. Last year, the state's legislature passed a law to establish the full-time missing persons position. The law states the position will be budgeted through the normal budget process, but as of this week, there is no position. The state's Attorney General, Jason Ravensburg, says his office doesn't have the $70,000 to pay someone. South Dakota State's website lists 30 to 40 missing Indigenous persons every day, according to reporting by KELO. Ravensburg says he's been working with tribal leadership to try and secure funds, including some possible federal money. A team of researchers has been awarded a major grant to help support tribal nations who are working to adapt to climate change. Last week, the U.S. Department of Agriculture awarded researcher Maureen McCarthy and her team $1.5 million to tackle this big problem. From heat waves to extreme winds, droughts, wildfires, and floods, the climate crisis poses huge adaptation challenges to Native American communities in the Intermountain West, and there are huge inequities across the U.S. in providing climate services and resources to tribes, she said in a statement. Using the grant funding, the team at the Desert Research Institute will work with Native farmers and ranchers to provide science-based information about how to continue growing their foods. The project will also hire Native Climate Fellows and a Youth Education Fellow. It will also establish an internship for Native college students who wish to report on the impacts of climate change on tribal nations. In exactly 1 month, Quincy Nate will learn if he's named the 2022 National Superintendent of the Year. He is currently the superintendent of the Chinle Unified School District on the Navajo Nation in Arizona. Nate is up against 3 other candidates across the country. This prestigious award is given out by the AASA School Superintendents Association, which was founded in 1865. The awards ceremony will be held at its national conference on February 17th in Nashville, Tennessee. An app for emojis made especially for Chickasaw people is now available. It features about 40 words and phrases, and one Chickasaw mother is already enjoying the new app.
Hi, I'm Lana Barrett. My tribe is Chickasaw from Oklahoma. My mom was born in 1932. She went to boarding school there in Oklahoma. She didn't speak English until she was 5 years old, and she was a fluent speaker. And as we grew up, though, she did not teach us the language. She taught us some words here and there. So here's the app. So far, I'm using it with my children and sending the text to them with the emojis. They were impressed with me and the fact that I could download the app. And second of all, they were impressed that we even have an app to be able to speak our language together and share this together. So if you want to know what the meanings are, you just click on this line up here, and then it goes through all the different symbols and the emojis. Here is CPL, Chapisa Lacho, meaning I will see you or will be seeing you. The language is so important to our culture and our tribes, right? For all Native Americans. But I think the interesting thing is that now we're trying to start to figure out ways of being able to use modern technology to be able to get the younger generation to understand the language and to be able to comprehend it more.
And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. Coming up, has Native voting power gotten stronger after the redistricting process? We'll find out. But first, a graphic novel brings a team of Indigenous detectives to save the day. When the ice cream man is a no-show, friends join forces to solve their first case. With twists around every corner, this case won't crack itself, but when you combine brains, loyalty, and persistence, justice will be served. This is the story of the REZ Detective, an all-ages graphic novel. Joining us are two of the creative crew, Tully Jacob and Stephen Paul Judd. They are longtime collaborators in writing and movies. Welcome. Tully, let's start with you. Tell us the story behind the story.
Oh yeah, so this was something that we kind of had percolating for a long time, and we originally talked about doing it as a television series for kids, and so we wrote the pilot, tried to sell it, and tried to get it out to different networks and things like that, and as things go, it didn't happen, but as Steve and I were talking, and as he was getting more in contact with people who were in like the comic book industry and the publishing industry, we talked about how we could turn this into a comic book. And before we were trying to say, we need to do a comic book, we need to write a comic book. Let's figure it out. We started talking through like we could do these superhero stories. He had this really cool idea that he could tell you about, and we were like, oh yeah, let's do this, let's do that. And then I was thinking about it. I said, hey, you remember that story we did with the REZ detectives? He said, oh yeah. So maybe we should do that as the comic book because because it's already written, so it'd be less work for us. But still, but it's still, something that we could percolate and create on and make it something for for the kids.
Yeah, and Stephen, I actually want to learn more because I know that this is in partnership with Illuminative.
Yeah, when the original idea came up, we did it all during COVID, during lockdown, and it was more. The main thing was we heard that like some Native boys were getting made fun of for having long hair, so we want to make sure that the character in there had long hair, so kids could see representation. There's the smartest person in the book is a girl, so we just wanted to make something cool that kids could go into a comic book store and say, "Hey, this looks really awesome." But once it turned into it was bigger than a comic book and a graphic novel. I was worried that we were outpricing the people that I really wanted to get it to. Because, when I was a kid, even a comic book at $3, if you're impoverished, that's a lot of money. You got to decide where you're going to spend your money. So I was contacted by the US Open to do a painting for charity, and they said the proceeds go to a charity of my choice. I contacted Illuminatives. Hey, I had this idea. If we partner together on this, could we use the money from this charity to send these books to different areas? I specifically wanted to send it to North Dakota, South Dakota, and Alaska because they have the largest suicide rate for the age range that we're looking for among Indigenous people. So they were super into that. They've been a great partner with this. So yeah, that's how we ended up partnering together, and it's been working out so far.
It sounds, Stephen, it's like a sneaky way to help Native youth. I love that. Could you tell us more about the intention that went behind the actual artwork in this graphic novel?
Yeah, we again, like I said, sometimes you'll see something that's made for Native people. And what we didn't want, Tully is a big comic book fan. I never wanted someone to go into the store and go, "This looks good for a Native comic." We wanted to look the best of the best. So we found an artist who is drawn for Marvel, DC, Mad Magazine, and the New Yorker. So he's all into the spectrum. And we just wanted to make it look really cool. So we worked with him on the character design. We just wanted it to look twofold, not stereotypical, and then fun and cool.
Sure. Tully, I'd love to hear, in your opinion, what has been the most rewarding part for you about working on this project?
I think overall, I mean, it was just like the whole process from beginning to end. Everything was just like totally like everything happened just perfectly. It all fell into place. Like from, Steve and I talking about beginning of the comic book to where we said, oh, we had the story and it was there for us and we just had to shape it for a comic book. Finding MK Perker as the artist, who was like Steve said, an award-winning artist, who's been out there and done a lot of stuff. And then, just getting it to Literati Press, who were ready to publish this and print it and put it out there and becoming one of their biggest sellers. And then now, as I'm getting out to people and listening to like everyone who have read it, to say, how good they feel about reading it, how good of a story it is, and that, and how much they like it. So overall, I guess it was everything that happened within it. And then talking to you guys and getting to be out there and just saying, hi, everybody, and so it's been, it's just been great overall. I think it's just been like the most perfect experience I've had.
Yeah, and the other part that strikes me is you said that you worked on this during the pandemic, and that's something that ICT has really wanted to learn more about, is how did the pandemic affect artists and affect the creative process? Stephen, would you mind talking more about the timing of this all?
Yeah, one of the things about the comic book, we wanted to make it as a TV show, but we knew that as a comic book, no one could stop us from doing that. You don't need permission to make a comic. So it was pretty simple. It started right before the pandemic. We reached out to MK. He agreed to do it. And then it was taking a long time, but we knew that, all right, we'll just keep working on it. It'll take almost a year to make. But then by then, things will hopefully start opening up and we'll have a product. And if we don't do it now, then in a year, we'll be like, oh, we should have started it. So for me personally, everything worked out. I can do a lot of stuff by Zoom. I'm also a writer, so I'm able to do that by Zoom. So it's actually worked out for me.
Yeah, and Tully, what about you?
Yeah, same thing. I mean, I've been fortunate because a lot of my work I do is in my room alone on a computer or with a video camera or whatnot, and so it's been good. I'm currently working on a TV show about Indigenous cooking. And that has been kind of complicated too, because we're like start and stop, because it's like, oh, COVID's hitting a little bit higher. So we probably should slow down and not really get out there. And we've been like very meticulous in how we do our shooting. And so scheduling our shooting. And so everybody's wearing masks, everybody's out there getting the shots, and we're all trying to keep our comfortable distance as much as we can. And so it's been a challenge, but it's a challenge that we were able to do our best to come to terms with, because once the shots came out, everyone the general rules that everyone should get a shot so that we don't spread our COVID to other people if we get sick. And so it's a bunch of challenges, but we still try to persevere because it's more about trying to get our work out there and get our stories out there.
It's really interesting to hear how this actually started for the both of you as the idea of a TV show. We all know, we're all very aware that 2021 was a breakthrough year for Native people on the screen, on television. Stephen, I'd love to hear, in your perspective, how do you think that this graphic novel is adding to that representation in terms of, putting Natives, as you said, in a space on the page where people can see them?
I think one thing about this graphic novel, it's for everyone. It's in the vein of a Scooby-Doo or Encyclopedia Brown. So it's not just Native kids that can read this, but hopefully, if you're a non-Native and you read it, and the thing about people that travel the world, they seem to be more open, more accepting of different cultures. It's the same with reading. So maybe at a young age you'll read, you'll have a great if your imagination is good, you're reading the story, you're having a great time, and then you realize, oh, that's like this kid in my class that I never talked to. So I think it's going to be good in both sense. And then Telly and I just want to make a book for our younger selves. Like if we saw this, would we be like, this is awesome, this is something we can be proud of? So that's what we tried to do.
Yeah, and Tully, adding to that conversation on representation, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely, because like you said, this has been like a great year for television and everything, and even like at the beginning, our book was been called REZ Dogs, Detective Agency, but then when Sterling had his show Reservation, I was like, oh, we better not step on it because we were so worried about like making sure everybody gets across the board, and so that representation is good because it's always, again, everything's happening for us the way we wanted it as kids. So like when we were a kid, we're watching a movie and we're seeing like these action heroes on the screen, but they do not look like us or anything. And so we're like, we probably look more like the bad guys, And so it's good to see like a lot of our creators and a lot of peers, a lot of people I know, people I was, starting out with, are out there making things happen. So, you got Sterling doing his TV show, you got Sierra doing her TV show, and you got Sydney Freeland directing even Grey's Anatomies and Walking Dead. And so you're having all these great things, and Steve Judd, who's doing a lot of great stuff. And so it's good to have all these cats who are really getting out there representing, and not just representing this the quote unquote Hollywood Indian, but representing us as human beings.
I want to talk a little bit more about how you both put Native language and culture at the forefront of everything that you do. In this project in particular, what are the main takeaways in that regard?
Yeah, every time, and it seems like anytime Telly and I have both done something or on our own or together, when it's a personal project that we get to decide upon, we usually try to always include Native language in it, something from our culture, and then we try to get culturally specific by one of our tribes.
Yeah, yeah. And Tully, was that important to you?
Oh, definitely, always. It's good to have, because language is our culture, and to have that going across, it's great, and it's everyone should, try to learn to speak the language.
And also, if I could mention, on the 12th, I had a Marvel comic. I have another comic out by Marvel that came out, so be sure to go by your comic book store and pick both of these graphic novels up.
Well, Tully Jacobs and Stephen Paul Judd, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yaki.
And we'll be right back. Redistricting is a process that happens every 10 years following the collection of the U.S. Census. In states all around the country, lawmakers are redrawing the maps of the districts that people vote in. Joining us today is ICT reporter Karina Dominguez, who worked with a team of other journalists to learn more about how redistricting is impacting the Native vote. Hi, Karina. I understand that you spoke with an attorney at the Native American Rights Fund who breaks down what gerrymandering is. Let's take a look at that first.
There's 4 different boxes that represent a district. And in those districts, there are 50 people. And let's just imagine that in those districts, the gray circles are the Native people and the blue circles are the non-Native people. So if you wanted to have proportional districts or 5 districts that were all equal, you would have 2 gray districts and then 3 blue districts. And that would be equal across the board because there are 40% of the population would be Native, the gray circles, and 60% would be non-Native, the blue circles. But what we have seen historically is that Native people can be cracked into different districts to dilute their vote. And so I think when you look at the third image, that would be an example of cracking Native people into different districts to dilute their vote. In that way, the Native people could never elect someone of their choice, or it'd be very difficult for them to do that when they're cracked into different districts. Is example of packing people into districts so that they get really only one district, or and then they can always be outvoted by the districts that are remaining. What we're aiming to do is have those proportional districts so that the representation is equitable across the board.
So, Karina, at a very high level, what are we seeing in the redistricting process for the Native vote?
Leo Senchi Manyavu. Yeah, so what we're seeing across the board is, very different, but, the same everywhere. So the redistricting efforts going on across Montana, Arizona, Idaho, Oregon, Alaska, that's kind of where we focused our efforts on. So we're seeing a lot of people, experts saying that there's actually voter suppression, widespread voter suppression, redistricting commissions and state legislatures are going in there and, kind of with surgical precision, making sure that these Indigenous communities are not having their voices heard. A lot of these districts were competitive and they're ending up, not being competitive anymore. I think Oregon had a really good example of that. So that was covered by Underscore and ICT reporter Chris Adlin. So, you see these very diverse communities there ending up, split, down the middle, rather than having those communities intact and seeing that voter power, that Native vote power.
One of the main examples that you and the other journalists who worked on this looked at is the district that Congresswoman Sharice Davids represents. Tell us about what we're seeing in Kansas.
Right. So in Kansas, they have a state legislature that actually is in charge of their redistricting process. So states go about it two different ways. There's the legislature that'll do it. They'll redraw those lines, or they have an independent commission. So in Kansas, we're seeing that they want to squeeze out the only Native Democrat that is in Congress right now. So we have Rep. Davids, who's being targeted. She's from the Ho-Chunk Nation. And one of the Senate presidents there in that state, she actually said that, they want to take that district away from her by giving her more Republican neighborhoods. So, that's kind of problematic, and it's very blatant, which is, very shocking to see. So they have their maps due June 1st, so they still have some time. So they're currently in the redistricting process, but many states have already wrapped it up.
So just so I'm understanding correctly, what's happening in Kansas is that Sharice Davids is getting more Republican districts that she would represent, which of course probably wouldn't help her given the fact that she's a Democrat. Am I understanding that correctly?
Right. Yeah. As we saw in that video that, NARF was so kind to help us produce. Yeah, that's exactly the case there. And, like I said, they're still in the process. So nothing's set in stone yet. They still, they're deep in the process, but they're still working on getting those maps drawn together. So they haven't had any maps proposed yet, but those are just the things that some of those state representatives are saying there. But for example, in Alaska, redistricting has already finished up and they have several lawsuits going on. So our Jacqueline Estes was able to cover that there. So she says that there's 5 lawsuits that are being filed there. And one of them is actually, there's a couple of citizens that are bringing those, but there's also a Alaska Native Corporation who's involved in one of those lawsuits there.
So yesterday, we're coming off of the hills of Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and what we've been hearing in the U.S. Congress, of course, is to pass legislation for voting rights. How does this story play into voting rights on a federal level?
Right. Yeah. Like we're seeing this widespread, right? Even in Arizona, that's the part of the story that I wrote. we're seeing that this is still going on and this is still a problem. So a lot of people are calling on members of Congress to help us address this issue. So that way it's not left up to each individual state. So they're trying to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And there's a number of, it's not just one act, there's several, but this is an election reform effort here to make sure that voices are heard and that things like this can't occur to suppress the vote, right? So right now, there was a real strong push last week, before MLK holiday, excuse me, to actually get this passed through the Senate. But with Arizona Senator Kyrsten Sinema and West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin not supporting that filibuster reform, or they suggested removing it, or doing this carve out that made sure that these kinds of bills couldn't get held up in Congress like this. They want to make sure that they get them to the president's desk. But the president did come out, excuse me, and he said that there is going to be another effort, even if they're not successful this time, they're definitely going to be trying to pass this in the future.
Great. Well, Karina Dominguez, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. Thank you for watching. For all the latest news and updates, visit us anytime at IndianCountryToday.com. I am Aaliyah Chavez.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.